This film captured the JFK assassination from beginning to end and then vanished from public view for 5 years. And when it came to light, parts of it had been destroyed, and one frame was kept a secret for another 6 years. What was this film hiding? That's the one question I try to answer in this video about the Zapruder Film Mystery. Dallas dressmaker Abraham Zapruder had no idea that he was going to capture a piece of history when he was about to leave his home on November 22, 1963. In such, he didn't take his camera with him until his assistant persuaded him to go back and get it. She insisted that he might be able to capture a glimpse of the sitting president, John F. Kennedy. And thank God he listened, because he was able to capture something unbelievable. It would be more interesting than all the home movies he made, but for much darker reasons than he expected. At around 12:30 p.m., Zapruder positioned himself on a concrete pedestal 65 feet from Elm Street and started rolling. He captured the lead motorcycles in the presidential motorcade moving across Elm Street, with admirers eagerly waiting for the president. Then came the presidential limousine, revealing the charismatic Kennedy in the back seat with his wife. Zapruder would have been content with capturing the president and his wife waving at the crowd as they passed him by. But then, he heard a loud noise, followed by another. The dressmaker kept rolling, and that's how he captured the only piece of media that covered the assassination of John F. Kennedy from start to finish. But things got even more interesting for Zapruder after he realized what he had on his hands. Zapruder had a lot of leverage when it came to negotiating with the media, but the men who came knocking weren't necessarily from the press. Zapruder all of a sudden found himself talking to the men in black, more specifically, a man from the CIA named Forrest Sorrells, who got involved in helping with developing the film. If you want to pull out the tinfoil hat early on, you put air quotes around the help and helping from now on. Anyway, Sorrells helped Zapruder develop the film at an Eastman Kodak lab, and within a day, Zapruder had a historic piece of media ready to be bought by the media. And so began the bidding war. While Zapruder had the original, he was no longer the only one with a copy of the film. Agent Sorrells had taken 2 copies after assuring Zapruder that the film would be used for investigative purposes only. The originals were up for bidding, and Time Inc. and Life magazine were the only standing candidates after CBS's bid fell too short. Ultimately, Life magazine won, but on one condition: that one frame from the film be excluded from publication. But why? Because Zapruder had a nightmare when he saw a spot on Times Square advertising, "See the president's head explode." So he wanted to keep the frame that showed the president's head exploding from being used in the published cut. Frame 313 was never broadcast. Heck, the entire film was tucked away for a long time. Media rights for the film were sold in 1963, but the film was first shown on TV in 1969. Frame 313 was excluded from all public versions of the film until March 6, 1975. A segment on ABC's Good Night America showed the main portion of the Zapruder film in its entirety. Then came the dramatic moment when viewers saw the assassination that they had only read or heard about. For over a decade, the American public had only seen Kennedy getting shot once in the neck, followed by him collapsing after the second shot. They had never seen the actual moment of impact. When the uncensored version of the film was made public, it caused a domino effect that led to the CIA and the FBI getting investigated. People were outraged, and not just because people were horrified to witness Kennedy's head explode, but because it was very obvious that the story they had been fed about the assassination did not line up with what was on the film. The people felt betrayed, especially because they used to trust their government. In many ways, the death of JFK was the death of America. Today, we take American skepticism for granted, but back in the 60s, 87% of Americans believed what the government said. More specifically, they believed whatever the government said about JFK's assassination. Right after the incident, roughly 27% of the people polled believed that the prime suspect, Lee Harvey Oswald, acted alone. Then, the Warren Commission, appointed by President Lyndon B. Johnson, published a report concluding that Oswald had acted alone and that his motive was unknown. After the report, 87% of those polled believed that Oswald acted alone. Can you even imagine a government report changing public opinion to that extent today? Now, if the government says good morning, we run out of our houses to check if it's truly morning. So what did frame 313 of the Zapruder film show that destroyed Americans' faith in their government? The answer is the angle of the shot. The film revealed the bullet coming from such a high elevation that it was not possible to hit two men with the same bullet. And that destroyed the magic bullet theory, on which the Warren Commission leaned quite heavily. Now, you might be asking, what is the magic bullet theory? According to the commission, Lee Oswald shot 3 bullets. One of them missed, one of them hit Kennedy in the head, and one of them hit both Kennedy and the man in front of him, Texas Governor John Connally. That was the magic bullet, because not only did it hit 2 men, it hit one of them 3 times. The theory suggests that the bullet entered Kennedy's neck from behind, exited from his throat, and then hit the governor in the back. After that, the bullet traveled downwards and exited below his right nipple, hitting his wrist before getting stuck in his thigh. Governor Connally suffered a fracture of the 5th rib, a punctured lung, a shattered wrist, and a bullet wound in his leg, all from the same bullet, which also hit Kennedy's neck. While the theory is hard to believe, it is necessary if you want to claim that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, because the investigators found only 3 rifle shells where he had stationed himself. And given that one of the bullets missed the limousine entirely and one of them hit the president in the head, everything else must have been done by one bullet. Or there were multiple shooters, a position that the government still won't accept. Here's the interesting part. The magic bullet is plausible, but only if Oswald shot from a lower elevation. The bullet needed to slope forward as it went down. But the Zapruder film showed something else. It seemed like the bullet that actually killed the president came from the front because he fell back as a part of his skull exploded. Look at this part after Kennedy had been shot in the back of his neck by Oswald. Oswald was behind, and the official autopsy states that his fatal shot also hit the president in the back of his head. But does that look like a shot from behind? That explains why the Zapruder film was tucked away from the general public for so long. Because if it proves more than one shooter, then it points to a conspiracy, not a lone gunman with unknown grievances. Things get even more suspicious when you look into Oswald's life. Lee Harvey Oswald was a Marine vet who defected to the Soviet Union in 1959. The guy was being watched by the CIA, yet he managed to fire 3 bullets and leave the scene. He was eventually arrested and interrogated over the next 2 days, but if there was any hope of getting the truth out of him, it was lost when he was shot in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters. That wasn't a dramatization. It happened on live television. And the moment Oswald was shot was captured in a Pulitzer-winning photo. The man who killed Oswald was arrested and identified as Jack Ruby, another lone actor who had acted of his own accord. Ruby got countless letters in jail thanking him for acting as God's executioner. But today, many people believe that he was simply tying up loose ends. If Oswald had any real beans to spill, he took them to his grave. We know Lee killed the president, and we know Jack shot Lee. And by we, I mean the entire human race. But what most of us don't know, including me, was that moments before Lee was shot, he was allowed to talk to the press, where he denied killing the president and told the reporters that he was never charged with the president's murder. But then, a reporter told him that he had been charged, and Oswald's reaction was pretty peculiar. Why did he look so confused? That reaction is not of a man who expected to be charged. It is more consistent with a defeated patsy realizing that he will be the fall guy. Lee Harvey Oswald was silenced that day, but people quickly identified other characters of interest. like the babushka lady spotted in multiple videos wearing a Russian headscarf. She could be seen filming the president when he was shot. Unlike Abraham Zapruder, the babushka lady was close enough to capture the angle and the direction of the bullet quite clearly. Unfortunately, the lady was never identified, and nobody knows what happened to her film. At least 32 people in the Dealey Plaza took photos and videos around the time of the shooting, but only a handful have surfaced, and many of them show a mysterious man holding an umbrella on a clear day. Even more suspicious is the fact that he raised his umbrella just as the presidential limousine passed him, and he closed it, but only after the president had been killed. This makes many people wonder whether the umbrella man was sending some kind of a signal. Some have theorized that the umbrella itself was some kind of a weapon. Whether you believe that or not, you have to admit that his reaction to the whole thing was pretty cold. While most people ran and cleared the Dealey Plaza, the umbrella man calmly closed his umbrella and sat down on the grass. Despite the suspicious circumstances of his presence and his actions, the umbrella man didn't get much attention until Josiah Thompson saw him in the Zapruder film. In his book, 6 Seconds in Dallas, Professor Josiah Thompson wrote about the umbrella man. He had worked with Life magazine, which was the only entity that had the original Zapruder film. Everyone else, including the Warren Commission, had a copy of a copy, and it is on the record that some of them even got copies with missing frames or frames switched. What Thompson saw was much clearer, and he concluded that there were 4 shots from 3 guns in 6 seconds. In the 1970s, a group of researchers applied an acoustics analysis technique to analyze audio from the incident, and they found 15 echo patterns grouped around 4 parts of the 8-second snippet, leading them to believe that 4 shots were fired during that period. The difference between 3 bullets and 4 bullets might not look like much until you realize that the police found only 3 empty rifle shells in Oswald's sniper nest. If there was a 4th bullet, it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald who fired it. Keep in mind that the Zapruder film showed the president's head jerking back as the final bullet hit him. And given that Oswald was behind the president at that point, the multiple shooter theory starts looking even more plausible. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. It seems like the government tried to manipulate the film to make it look like Kennedy's head jerked forward. In 1964, the US government printing office released multiple volumes of evidence and testimony compiled by the Warren Commission, and 158 frames of the Zapruder film were included in Volume 18. But frames 314 and 315 were switched. On the surface, this looks like a harmless mistake, but when you see the effect of the switch, you can see why it's a little suspicious. This is how the frames look when viewed in order. You can see the president's head jerking back, but when you switch the frames, it creates the opposite effect. Now it looks like JFK's head was pushed forward by the impact. When FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was asked about the swap, he chalked it up to a printing error. It's not clear whether this convenient printing error happened before the evidence was shown to the Warren Commission or after. If the commission was shown frames in an order where Kennedy's head moves forward, then it is reasonable to believe that they concluded that Harvey alone kept firing from behind until the job was done. But when the Zapruder film was first aired on Good Night America, there was public outrage about how wrong the Warren Commission had been. An increasing number of people started rejecting the bullet from behind story. Subsequent hearings revealed that the CIA had literally plotted other assassinations, and since this information was withheld from the Warren Commission, a new committee was formed. The House Select Committee on Assassinations looked into the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and President John F. Kennedy with a highly critical lens. And here's what they had to say about the JFK assassination. Scientific acoustical evidence establishes a high probability that 2 gunmen fired at President John F. Kennedy. The committee believes, on the basis of the evidence available to it, that President John F. Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. The committee is unable to identify the other gunmen or the extent of the conspiracy. So, the Warren Commission got copies of the Zapruder film slides made by the FBI, and it concluded that there was one shooter with no particular motive firing from behind until the job was done. On the other hand, the House Select Committee on Assassinations was formed after the Zapruder film was made public, and it concluded that there was a bigger conspiracy and a high likelihood of multiple shooters. That was the power of the Zapruder film, which begs the question, why was it hidden for so long? One possible explanation is that the Zapruder film was kept out of public view because it debunked the government's position. The single shooter story put the American people at ease because the man responsible had been caught and had even met his maker on live TV. That was the closest thing to revenge that Americans were going to get. Had the Zapruder film been shown early on, people would have been suspicious of the solo Oswald story. They would want the shooter in the front to be caught and tried as well. Who knew how long that was going to take? Shattering the illusion of public safety and keeping it broken for years, if not decades, would do irreparable damage to the nation's morale. The Zapruder film is just one of the films that the government got its hands on. There was another one made by Orville Nix, and it was never returned after it was reportedly given to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Nix's descendants are still fighting to get it back. His granddaughter, Gail Nix Jackson, filed a lawsuit against the US government seeking $10 million, but the case was dismissed without prejudice. So the fact that the Zapruder film even surfaced is a miracle, but since we know better than to believe in miracles, we have to question that as well. Why did the Zapruder film see the light of day? If the government kept it tucked away to avoid causing panic and confusion and to close the chapter on the tragic assassination of JFK, why did it let the film get out at all? And one answer is that it had been sufficiently altered. Now, this is a scary answer, but one that aligns with claims made by CIA image analyst Dino Brigioni, who got to see the film when it was first brought for development. Brigioni claimed that after the CIA brought the Zapruder film to its National Photographic Interpretation Center, it was no longer the same film. During development, identifying features could have been blurred, and crucial frames could have been altered or completely destroyed. This also checks out with Life's statement that one of its photolab technicians had accidentally destroyed frames 208 to 211. Moreover, frames adjacent to those were damaged back in November 1963. What happened between frames 208 and 211? The magic bullet was fired. And the fatal shot, which was captured in frame 313, was kept out of public view based on Zapruder's request. Or was Zapruder's wish just an excuse, and the real wish was that of the government? This brings us to an even more sinister theory, that the government, or more specifically, the deep state, killed JFK. If that's the case, every single maneuver to rush to judgment and conclude the matter makes sense. Of course, no one would believe such a thing had the CIA not plotted assassinations before. The agency also had a history of ducking presidential orders. A far less compelling theory is that Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson got JFK killed. That one doesn't really seem plausible because a vice president is basically the first lady minus the marriage. It's a prestigious title but doesn't really have any executive power. And even if Johnson had the ties to get Kennedy killed, he wouldn't have had enough resources to influence Zapruder and Life magazine. The first person to connect with Zapruder on the matter was a CIA agent. So to the extent that Zapruder's film was altered or modified, it had to be the CIA. That said, a far more vanilla theory is that the CIA simply wanted to investigate the film and that the frames were conveniently degraded and destroyed in the process of developing and copying the film. As for why the film was not made public right after the incident, a simple explanation would be to protect the public. Americans in the 60s were different from Americans today. They were more patriotic and less jaded. More importantly, they were not exposed to extreme content as often as the internet-equipped Americans of today. Even curse words were shocking to the public, so one could only imagine what would happen if they saw their president's head explode. Zapruder himself had nightmares of Frame 313 for days, while most of our generations who watched that clip slept peacefully. I mean, look at Trump's attempted assassination. Something that serious became a comical joke and a meme for Gen Z. The problem with this explanation is that it is not derived from an objective look at the evidence. Instead, it's manufactured to present a harmless explanation for the different bits and pieces. That's the main criticism of most theories related to the JFK assassination. Almost all of them require you to start with a pre-built opinion and then interpret the facts to fit your narrative. That's the only issue I have with the JFK assassination. We don't really know who. Take, for example, the position that JFK was killed by the mob, a very popular theory back in the 70s. If you wanted to prove that theory, you could say that nightclub owner Jack Ruby was connected to the mob because almost every club owner was back then. And then you could say that Ruby was acting on behalf of the mob when he tied up the loose end that was Lee Harvey Oswald. Of course, you would have to ignore the fact that Ruby himself was never whacked by the mob, which meant that he was a loose end who died of natural causes, not really the mob style. Let's switch gears and adopt a different theory. That the US government killed JFK, a very popular stance these days. If you want to prove this theory, you can bring attention to the fact that Oswald was in police custody when he was shot. You could say that his public execution was planned to put the public at ease. But then you would have to ignore the fact that the police literally let this supposed fall guy speak to reporters. Had he been a part of the conspiracy, wouldn't he have cried for help or blurted out something to create doubt? Let's switch gears once again to yet another theory that the Russians killed JFK, a theory that was an option from day one of the assassination. Oswald had once defected to the Soviet Union. He had overstayed his visa and was even given a trade job there. And even after returning to the US, he actively championed communism. Compelling evidence, right? At the same time, you could say that Oswald's Russian connection made him the perfect fall guy. But it was all wrong theories. In fact, Oswald himself said as much in so many words. "I didn't shoot anybody," he yelled at the reporters when he was arrested. "I'm just a patsy." We also now know that JFK and Nikita Khrushchev were actively working on having diplomatic relations for both countries. However, despite all these theories on who actually pulled the trigger, one thing is certain. Someone wanted JFK gone, and they got what they wanted. And not only that, but they also got away with murdering the President of the United States of America. Whoever that group or person was had to be someone influential. So influential that they can get away with murdering the president. And deny all you want, but those kinds of people are only located in one place. So no matter how you try to spin it, it all comes back to this. If it quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, or eats like a duck, it's definitely a duck. Heck, the Russian government tried to do the same thing the Warren Commission did with the Chernobyl incident by covering it up, but they didn't get their way, and their secrets were all out in the open. And what was revealed shocked the whole world.